All right. Welcome to Taiki Talk. It's usually Tuesday Taiki Talk, but today is Friday Taiki Talk with an amazing guest, Mori Taheripour, author of, I don't know, I'm trying to make sure that you can see
You
it.
got
Yeah,
it.
I'm very excited.
Very excited to be here. I don't know why I can't see you now. Did I jinx you just as soon as I said you got it? You're on mute, by the way.
I don't know why it didn't mute. Okay, let's see.
Now you got
There
it.
we go. Bring yourself. How to negotiate fearlessly. Um, Sorry about tech. This is pretty minor for us. I think my assistant was just telling me you just got kicked off. We're back. That's the important thing. So today we are going to be talking to Maury about I'm getting over here about negotiation, and as her book says, bringing yourself as you are. Um, So she is a globally recognized negotiation expert, an award-winning faculty member at Wharton School, a highly sought-after speaker and author of Bring Yourself, the book we just showed you. Or apparently I'm royal. I just showed you. With over 20 years of experience in negotiations, DEI, and sports business. Maury's impressive roster of clients include Fortune 100 companies, major sports leagues, leading charitable institutions, and government agencies. Top business publications and news and media outlets have featured Maury's work, including ESPN, Forbes, Inc., Marketplace, Money, NPR, and The Next Chapter by American Express. She regularly contributes to sports discussion on Wharton Business Daily on Sirius XM. Maury is a board member of the board of directors for USA Track and Field and the advisory board of the Sports Leadership and Administration undergrad degree program at UMass Boston. She earned her BA from Barnard College of Columbia University and her MBA from Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Good Maury.
I was like, God, that's long. Yeah.
I mean, you're as spectacular as you are. You get a long intro.
It's so nice to be here. Actually, you're closing out my very long week, so this is great.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'd say the same to you for Taiki, my Taiki, and there's always stuff they can talk about. So let's get into it. I'm very excited about this because and actually but this is my book recommendation for my blog post because I was reading it in preparation for today. And so I'll admit, I was thinking going into it, if I read this book, she's a guest, I want to be knowledgeable. I started reading this book and I couldn't put it down. And I'm not just saying that, I don't give out compliments easily. What I love about this book is that one, it wasn't boring, and two, it really resonated with me. So I was one of those people you described, and I was like, I feel seen and embarrassed. Seen and embarrassed. Because we're gonna get into your 4 principles, but it was totally like I actually talk to people about I call her Panoma, well, what's the Paloma? That's like my Sasha Fierce. And I'm like, and so I do this when I bring in negotiations. And then I was reading and I was like, oh, I don't have to do that.
No
Bring my
such excuse needed. Yep, no Paloma needed.
yes. So I mean, well, I've been talking about this book all week to anyone who listens. So probably it's why my text kept My text responses from people getting longer and longer. Right? So what led you to write this book?
Really good question. I should say it was definitely not my own idea. It was suggested to me that I do it. From someone who had seen me, or actually rather had heard about my success in the classroom with my students. And not just success, like she's a great professor. It was really, people were saying things like, it changed my life. It, so deeply impacted me, and, things that we don't normally see out of a negotiations class. And I think, and, just to put it out, there was somebody that struggles with imposter syndrome. I was like, me write a book? Are you kidding? I was pre-med in college. I took tests, I didn't write. And so that took probably about 4 years just to wrap my
Wow.
around it. And it was also that there were so many other books out there, and I didn't want to just be another negotiations book. I didn't want to write just another negotiations book to add to the piles and piles of books. So while I was sort of that sort of struggle with, can I even do this? I also did a lot of research. I read all those books, and I listened to different instructors, and I looked at the way the message was delivered. And it's not to say any of it was wrong. It's not, because this is also a subject that there's so many ways, and this is why it's one of my principles, but there's so many different ways to communicate and do
Mhm.
so effectively as an instructor, because your audience is so diverse. And I think that just wrapping my head even around that said, there's no right or wrong. I just feel very passionately about my message. And I think
Mhm.
passionately about my message because it humanizes it and it makes it very accessible. Which is why I think that maybe my book should have fall under a business book, but more of a self-help book section in a bookstore, because I think the subject also scares people. So they don't necessarily pick it up off the shelf. And to your point earlier that, oh, it's going to be just another boring negotiations book. And I'm proud to say it's not at all, because it is about human beings, and it is about those human connections, and it is about, you as your authentic self, which I think makes it really distinct and different from everything else out there. So very long answer to your question. I thought there was a gap. I thought there was a need. And once I sort of wrapped my head around how much I thought that message had to be out there, then, not to say it was easy, it was not easy, but it sort of fueled my passion for writing the book.
Yeah, I thought it was both accessible and flexible because it isn't like you bring yourself to this book too, not just the negotiations. My mindset totally shifted. It was funny because like just when I was thinking to myself, I'm like, this is a total shift in mindset. Really, 2 pages later, he started talking about that. And I was like, oh, okay. And there's not a whole lot of principles. I had actually had the principles written down, and my oldest son decided to run off with my notes because that's all fun. Well, so one of the things I mentioned is that I loved, you're like, you negotiate in your real life. And I'm like, I am constantly negotiating with these toddlers. So I have to actually read it from the book. I read it online, like not online, ebook. Um, so I'm having a hard time finding it. I'm like, come back.
What do
Here
you
we
look?
go. So the first principle, do you want me to read them all 4 of them and then we can kind of go through them or?
You could read it. I could tell them to whatever you want. However,
Okay.
your interview.
Yeah, you probably memorize, it's only 4, but you probably know. The first one is negotiation first and foremost about human connection.
Yeah.
Um, and I love that. Well, actually, I love all of these. And because it's, I mean, I'll just say for each one, I'll just say why I connected to it. And then after we go through all of it, we can give you a break. I love that because it made it a lot less intimidating. It's like, yeah, I can connect to humans, which sounds weird, but sometimes, you just need that weird take on it. The second principle is negotiation requires knowing your worth. So true. That was when my mindset really started to shift, when it's like, yeah, that makes sense. And I like how you go into it's not necessarily totally a gender thing, but there is some gender issues in there. Negotiating is something we do all the time. like at bedtime,
Mhm.
or mealtime if you have toddlers, or just in life in general, trying to figure out like when you're going to get people to come to do things around the house or yeah, so it's outside of like work too. And the last one is anyone can be a good negotiator, which is it's nice to hear. 'Cause she puts the principles are in the introduction. So I hadn't actually gotten into the book when I read that, and I was kind of like, I mean, she said so. So far, I've liked what she's written, so I believe it. So, um, yeah, so I mean, you can talk about them in general or however you want to do that.
Yeah, they all fit with basically what I just talked about because it's really interesting teaching a class that so many people are sort of afraid or anxious about the topic itself. And they take the class because it's like taking medicine. They know that they have to do it just to get better, but it's not necessarily like I'm so looking forward to taking this pill, right? It's not that at all. And the most probably gratifying thing is I think this may be one of the very few classes where probably within 30 minutes of the class, you can almost see
Mhm.
people sitting up straighter. You can almost see sort of the empowered sort of mindset sort of rolling into their heads and thinking, oh, that like, and it's immediate because one of the first things, well, I sort of go around and ask people what they think, sort of, when is the last time you negotiated? Or what does that successful negotiator look like to you, given what we see in the media or we read in books or what have you? Or how many of you are anxious about it? And these are sort of typical questions I ask because I just want to get a feel for who the audience is and what they're thinking about. And it's funny, I always say, who's anxious about negotiations? And like 2 hands go up. And I'm like, who's anxious and is not raising their hand? And okay, now all of a sudden 25 hands go up because they're anxious about being anxious. But it's that kind of a class, but it's so amazing, I have to say, that within just a few short minutes, that I have the privilege of changing people's minds that quickly because I kind of go through some of these principles, which is, first of all, I know a lot of us think like negotiations is that, what am I going to get out of it? How much money am I going to spend? The very transactional thing. But it's so much more than that. And it's so much about sort of human connections.
Mhm.
And thus, you can know all the facts in the world, you can know all the numbers in the world, but if you don't have emotional intelligence, so like that beautiful balance of IQ and EQ, then you're not probably going to be as successful as you would think, just saying, oh, I'm great with numbers, right? Or, I know my budget, but there's a whole human element to this that sort of makes negotiations more about persuasion than anything else, right? Your connectivity with someone, the empathy that's created, the connections that are created. So that's the first thing people are like, oh, I really never thought about it that way because they think negotiations is all about transactions. And then this is another principle where I'm like, you do it all the time. You do it from the morning. My snooze button is my biggest negotiations counterpart, right? It's every morning or a big decision I make, am I going to work out in the morning or I'm going to do it in the afternoon? Or am I going to call this client or am I not going to call that client today? And any decision, personal, business, whatever it is that we make on our own, that's a negotiation. So we most often negotiate with ourselves. And
Yeah.
then you said earlier, the kids, the husband or wife or significant other or partner,
Exterminator.
all of it, right? All of it, your pets. You were negotiating when we're driving, when we're merging onto traffic, all of this stuff. And for people listening, they're like, oh, we've heard her say that before. But because I use those examples constantly, there's sort of it's very intentional because I feel like once we realize, wait, this is something I've been doing all my life and didn't really even know that was in negotiations. And I think, so what do you all think now? And most of them are like that I'm a better negotiator than I thought I was because I've got a lifetime of practice, right?
Mhm.
So when you believe those types of things, and oh, by the way, I give them then examples of successful negotiators, and they're as different as night and day, right? There's the really aggressive, let's say a sports agent or executive versus the very sort of accommodating, understanding, empathetic diplomat.
Mhm.
And then everything in between. And like, if there was just one kind of a successful negotiator, how could then all these people have found success? Because there isn't just one kind, right? And they show up sort of as they are, but they have different approaches of navigating those waters based on who they are and how best they can have those conversations, right? Reflecting their own personalities and their own strengths. And I think that last one that you meant, that the first one you meant, one of the first ones you mentioned, but it's the last one that I often bring up because people don't make this connection. And once you make it, it's like so clear. But it's the whole notion of you cannot be a good negotiator unless you know your own worth and your own value and recognize it and honor it, and sort of walk in it, right? And I think and that's where my class then definitely goes off base for them, because they're like, wait a minute, this feels like therapy. I don't know if I'm ready for this conversation. She's asking us to like look inward instead of outward. I thought this was going to be all about what they're going to want. I'm like, we're not going to go there yet, because until we can sort of defeat, and I use that word purposely too, the sort of the little negative self-talk gremlins that live inside of our bodies, the ones that are all trying to pull us away and make us think that we don't deserve, or we're not good enough, or how could I possibly ask for that? Nobody will give that to me. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the doubts, the self-doubt that sort of unfortunately fuel our thinking and really sort of hijack our strength and our courage around negotiations is really then becomes sort of the biggest factor. Because unless you can do those things, you are never really going to be successful, because you're not giving yourself permission to ask for all that you deserve. You're never going to give yourself permission to be completely yourself, because you're not completely accepting yourself. And there's pretense, and you're always showing up wondering, this is the gender piece of it, I can't smile too much because they'll think I'm weak. If I frown, they'll think, oh, she's angry, or if I continue to talk about my needs and the things I'm sort of aiming to get, then they'll think I'm aggressive, so I'm gonna have to find that path right down the middle. What? Like, what are we doing? Like, really, what are we doing? And all that energy for pretense is really self-defeating. And it takes all our power away, because really, ultimately, what we're saying is we're not good enough to show up as ourselves. And I think that once you can address that, and people are probably like, yeah, that's taken a lifetime of therapy. It's hard work. But once you can sort of even acknowledge that that's what it is that's holding you back and start addressing it, you're going to see immediate results, and in your relationships, in your relationship with yourself, in your workspace, in all aspects of your life. And I think that's why that was probably it's like almost the biggest thrust of what I teach, but also you see it time and time again show up in a different way in the book.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny when I was reading the book, I was thinking in particular, I was leading this working group, and it was difficult. No one agreed with anyone else. And I'm like, I do my best negotiations over a bottle or two of wine. And it's the EQ, like just finding out, like, so what is it what's concerning you? What's bothering? It's just like talking. And I never really thought about that as a negotiation, because it's just like, well, I'm just finding out, like, where's our common ground? How can we build on this? And I never thought about that as negotiation, but it's an example of how, like you said, we're negotiating all the time, whether we use that title or not.
Yeah.
But
and
so
it changes everything.
Okay.
It changes everything for people, like it did for you, right? It's like an immediate thing.
Yes, it's luckily I wasn't in a classroom. So I was sitting in my rocking chair reading. So I could experience all these emotions, the roller coaster of, like I said, being seen and embarrassed, and then felt seen and empowered. So I see. That's what it was. So what do you think people are most surprised about your approach?
I think, again, sort of society and sort of media, they're just like a doozy, right? We are sort of acclimated. We are sort of at this point accepting of negotiations being sort of this win-lose proposition, and the headbutting and the conflict-ridden conversations. And so when, first of all, I make the whole concept of it so accessible, and so talk about the experiences that you have are completely transferable. So don't think that what you do at home with your kids doesn't really apply anywhere else. It really does, because it's all the same things that you're doing, right? So once they sort of are kind of really surprised by that, then they're equally, I think, surprised when I say, and because of that, because this is just how we live our life, and this is how we navigate our life, it's not conflict ridden, right? That's maybe like one sliver of this really big pie. And if you think about it, most of your conversations are not win-lose. Most of your conversations are about getting something, particularly in our relationships, particularly in long-term relationships. The notion of compromise comes from negotiations, right? That is ultimately this notion of shared compromise, shared risk, shared success. And it's not that people don't know it. It's just that that's not what's hammered into our heads, right? And they've either had bad experiences, somebody's taken advantage of them, be it a car, they've gone in to buy a car they feel taken advantage of, or they asked for a raise and they didn't get it, or the sense of rejection or failure is enough to scar them and really carry that into every other conversation. So of course we're going to be anxious if we think every one of these conversations is about conflict, right? And I think that's one of the most surprising things, is that how all of this is really tied together. And lastly, I would say, it's just not one surprising thing. I think one of the biggest aha moments for them is where I show them why knowing your self-worth is so important, because it's like this easy formula that until you are aspirational about the things that you want, until you give yourself the opportunity to sort of dream big, and not put limitations on what you can get, then you won't ask for it, right? Until you are able to defeat that, then finally you'll have the courage to actually ask, because you've now gotten over all of those, again, the negative self-talk. And once you ask for it, then you're likely to get it, right? It's like 2 + 2 = 4. But if you don't think you deserve, or you don't have the courage to ask, or whatever it is that holds you back, then you're likely not going to aim for it, right? That doesn't become your goal in some ways. And then when that's not your goal, then you're not going to ask for it. And if you don't ask for it, nobody's just going to give it to you, right? So you're not going to get it. And it's so clear for people once you sort of explain it. Well, and in some ways they still don't believe it until they actually see it happen. And they're like, oh my God, this thing, like I asked for it and I actually got it. And I'm like, oh my God, isn't that crazy? Like,
Imagine that.
Be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it, right? And get ready for those moments instead of the sort of the defeatist attitude. And I think that it just all feels really good. I think that's why I love to teach as much as I do, because just watching people sort of immediately shift in front of you, and like I said, almost sit up straighter and almost start smiling. I know what they're thinking. It's like, this isn't going to be as hard as I thought this was going to be, right? This is a whole way that not only makes it easier, but is more appealing to me as a person, my values.
Yeah, it's one of the things that really, well, two things. One of the things, like once you reach that point, it's not even a matter of having courage. It's just asking for what you deserve.
Right.
And the other thing that struck me, I'm gonna start calling them rocking chair moments, was when you said that, I can't remember the guy's name, but the condo exercise, and you're like, people who don't ask for what they actually want or appreciate, that they focus on like the one or two things working against them instead of focusing on, okay, where are the assets? They focus on the deficits. And I was like, man, another rocking chair moment.
Yeah, and because it's more in line with how you see yourself, or how you see what you deserve, or you see what you expect your performance to be, right? Which is again diminished. So imagine that if you are your own best advocate, right? Or you're supposed to be your own best advocate.
Yeah.
Instead, you're spending your time thinking about, well, that argument's not good enough because, I didn't do that. Or how can
Yeah.
I do that because of the 10 things I only did 9.5? Or, you start thinking about the negative, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, how are you going to have somebody invest in you? How are you going to actually appeal to somebody's sense of order and thinking they should give you a raise when you yourself are questioning whether you deserved it in the first place?
Yeah.
Don't fight yourself, don't negotiate yourself down from a position of strength, right? Leave that to somebody
Mhm.
else, because other people do that for us really well all the time, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to poke holes in your own story. Other people, trust me, will do it.
Yes.
You just have to figure out how you are going to validate your own worth and how you're going to really sort of stand in your power in that way. And I think that that's people, we just, it's so much easier for us to be like, I don't know if I can ask for that. What if they, and the what ifs and the what ifs and the what ifs. I think we just don't want to be rejected, and we take
Yeah.
the word no as a rejection when it's really not a rejection of us. It's just a rejection of that thing. So our egos are play really incredible games on our minds.
Yeah. I was just looking for the passage where you said that exact thing. Don't put yourself down because
Mhm.
other people are way too willing to do it for you. So don't be that person and do it. Don't do the work for them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh, so lastly, it's one of my favorite questions because I love TV. And I know the answer because I read the book, but you guys haven't read the book yet. Get it. But what is your favorite TV show around negotiation that and talks about negotiation?
Well, since you said TV show, let me give you something different. Then I'll give you a movie.
What
Uh,
is well, you may change from the book, but what or
no, but
movie or
first of
TV
all,
show? How's that?
first of all, it's funny because that notion of we negotiate all the time. If you ask people to think, okay, how many negotiations are involved in movies that you watch or shows that you watch? And then when they think about negotiations in this sort of different light, they're like, every movie, every show, right? Because it's true. Like there's a scene or two scenes or many scenes. I just watched Bridge of Spies, which apparently not a lot of people have seen, with Tom Hanks. And there was like, it was negotiated
Oh,
from, the very beginning credits all the way to the very end. And so when you pay attention, you see it, right? And shows like The Office and 30 Rock and all these shows, there's so many negotiations folks out there that you'll actually start laughing when you finally see like this is what they're doing, this is negotiations. But I would say one of my favorites is actually from the movie Hotel Mumbai.
oh,
And I think it's actually more relevant today than ever. But for those people who haven't seen it, it's a spectacular, depressing but spectacular movie. It's about the 2008 terrorist attacks in Mumbai, and horrific event. And this takes place in the famous hotel. And the whole premise of this movie, I mean, it was sort of really the terrorist attacks and the sort of history behind this were sort of religious based. But when you look at this magnificent hotel, you also start seeing all the different classes of people. So there's the really wealthy guests who are there on their vacation, all the way down to the people who are servants, or they're working in the kitchen as staff or hotel staff. And the terrorist attack happens, and all of a sudden, your humanity just shows up, right? From everything from fear of death to how do we help one another get through this, and how do I help you survive? And there's one particular scene where there's this woman, older British woman, and obviously very rich, very privileged. And she goes to one of the key characters, which is the hotel chef, and says, listen, I think you're one of your staff members, and this is Dev Patel is in the movie. He plays this role of Ashok.
mm,
I think he's one of the terrorists, and I'm very uncomfortable. I think he's working with them. Well, it obviously is because Dev Patel's character is Sikh and he wears a turban. So therefore, just not being educated about what, sort of the different faiths, right? Being Muslim, being Sikh, she didn't know any of that. She just thought he must be one of them because he looks in her mind like one of them. And
Mhm.
I need you to basically deal with this. So obviously the chef knows better. So he walks up to Dev Patel and says, listen, our guest is feeling uncomfortable. I need you to remove your turban. And for somebody who's Sikh, this is actually,
Yeah,
right? It's who you are. It's sort of this symbol of all that you stand for and all that your values. And it runs deep. It's not just an article of clothing. And so Ashok, or Dev Patel's character, walks up to this woman and says, basically, hi, I just want to introduce myself, right? I'm Ashok. I'm a father. I want to show you a picture of my family. So he shows a picture of his wife, his kids, and basically humanizes himself.
Mhm.
And gives her a background about who he is, but then he also explains the turban and says, just as important as they are to me, so is my faith. And I wear this turban because it's symbolic of all that I stand for. And I never take it off for that reason. And so he goes to this explanation, and you can see in her face, like, just starting to let go, and really in the character you never thought could have empathy, you all of a sudden see this compassion. And he turns around and says, but if you want me to take it off, I will, just to make you feel comfortable. And she says, no, I don't want you to take it off. And she said, I'm just scared. And he says, we're all really scared. And so that scene comes to an end. And it's even emotional for me explaining, because I think in today's world,
Yeah.
how much do we get in trouble just making assumptions about people, about what they look like and the color of their skin, or how we feel like they're dressed, and what that is indicative of who this person is. And our world it would be a whole lot better if, through the art of negotiations and these communications, we could better understand each other, not change each other necessarily, but just better understand each other. And so this is where negotiations is really powerful. I think if you can sort of head in that direction, we'd be better people. We'd be worldlier people in a lot of ways. We'd be
Mhm.
empathetic people. We'd have compassion and kindness for one another. And so it's absolutely one of my favorites. And like I said, it's really relevant today. And one last note is that at the end of the movie, actually, he takes off his turban to wrap it around somebody who was bleeding out, which showed that when it comes to surviving or helping somebody live, that was the last thing on his mind. And so really, really great movie. But these negotiation scenes in some of these movies really make you sort of sit back and say, wow, like, I never saw it that way. So it's excellent.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to see if it's streaming somewhere.
Yeah,
It's
not
cool.
the happiest movie. You're not like, ooh, this is not,
Yeah, but it's
No
yeah,
Mermaid, but no, it's again very timely, actually.
yeah. Little Mermaid's kind of sad too. You
What do
know,
you?
you took the songs out. It's like, "Mm." Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're so.
Um, Again, get this book. It will change. Get the book that's behind her. I got it. Right there. It's amazing. It'll change your life, the way you think about so many things, yourself, negotiation. Um, it's so easy to read. I'm serious. Anyway, I can go on about it, but I won't. My friends would tell you, like, shut up.
I thank you for that. I also, one more thing to add is I have a newsletter, and this came out as a result of everybody saying, when are you going to put out more content? And so we worked, and it came out in form of a newsletter. So that's great. People should subscribe to it. If I may say to myself, it's packed with information.
And how do they sign up for it?
They can go to my website,
Okay.
or they can find me on IG, and definitely LinkedIn, because every time we post a newsletter, it shows up on LinkedIn, and our different
Awesome.
articles we put up there too. So if you can't find it, it's because you're not looking.
Yes, I'll include it in the newsletter that's going out too. So
Thank
I
you.
should about this book in my newsletter.
Thank you. I
So
appreciate
again,
it.
thank you so much for granting us audience.
Thank you. Enjoy your long weekend. I hope you take some time.
Yes,
I hope everybody gets a little moment to breathe. Thank you again. Thanks for hosting me.
you too.
This was fun.
Oh, next week there will not be a Taiki talk because the 4th of July lands on a Tuesday, and I'm not going to do it another one later that week. So, so we'll see everybody in a fortnight. I like to say fortnight because it sounds fancy. All right, see you guys later.